Raising our children, and I started thinking about television. And so I started to sort of play around with that idea of like, well, what if a character wouldn't or couldn't die? You know, imagine like all the amazing things that you could do with immortality. And then I started to think, but what if my son wasn't immortal as well? You know, would the pain of watching him grow old and die, family and friends, be too much? Would, in the end, it proved to be more of a curse than a blessing? And so that's what I started with, was that character and that conflict. And it felt like, you know, like a really ripe idea for a television character. And then from that you sort of extrapolate and say, well, what would he do for a living? And I liked the idea that he was always adopted, which sort of felt interesting to me. And then I thought, well, but maybe he sort of hung that part of his life up, and he would be working as a medical examiner, so that he just, I like the irony of a guy who can't die being surrounded by death all day. And then it would also allow him to examine the bodies and see every possible version of death, to try and figure out a way out of it. And then, you know, from there sort of came up with the detective character, because, you know, you can't just have a character who's contemplating his existence every week. We needed a story engine, so that became the kind of enemy and detective procedural, the Castle Club, if you will. Yeah.
Well, the twist with the other person who
who knows his,
can you talk a little bit about that and where that's headed and where that came from?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, it basically came from the idea of when you're thinking about this, you're to a certain extent, you know, if you're just doing a procedural, you've got your detectives or your lawyers or your, you know, medical examiners, but you don't have to do any world building. And in this, you know, because it's such a big buy at the center of the show, you have to start to think, well, okay, does anyone else have this? And once you start to think about it, it becomes kind of an interesting question if there was somebody else who had this. But unlike Henry, who, you know, has sort of maintained his morality and his ethics, what if somebody else was sort of the opposite of that? And wouldn't that be an interesting, in the sort of Sherlock, the Moriarty character? So that's how it kind of started, and that character and Henry are on a sort of slow burn, so we don't do it every episode. We have special episodes that feature that character. He's in the first 2 episodes, or at least his voice is. In episode 6, he starts to become kind of personified, where we don't necessarily see his face, but we meet him. And episode 6, which will air not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday, is a Jack the Ripper copycat. And so we get our flashback stories. We get to flashback to like 1880s London, which was actually like the birth of medical examiners as a profession, the first time doctors were sort of brought into a crime scene. And then we raised the question of that was an unsolved murder. We have a Jack the Ripper who did it sort of perfectly, exactly the same way that the original case was. Could the anonymous caller have been there? Or the question is raised, at least. And that character kills Henry in that episode. But yeah, kills him, which is the fun part of our show, is our hero can die at any given time.
Are there any other infamous cases from the past that might come up?
Well, in that particular episode, it's not just Jack the Ripper. It starts as Jack the Ripper, and then it becomes a Black Dahlia. It starts to become a case of someone that's sort of miming or recreating a few of the famous serial killers. I don't know if Black Dahlia was a serial killer, but that particular homicide. And that's that episode. And then, you know, every episode we try and go into a world. So we'll go into the world of jazz, and will allow us to tell a present-day jazz story that flashes back to the 1950s, and we get to meet a young Abe, a 10-year-old Abe, when Henry's trying to teach him like classical piano, and all he wants to do is play jazz. And there's a famous jazz musician that lives next door to them in their apartment building, and we get to tell a sweet kind of 10-year-old Abe and story. We do an episode, it's like our 50 Shades of Grey episode, where a dominatrix possibly kills somebody in a session gone wrong, but then she sort of and Henry develop an unusual relationship where she's someone that understands people's pain. And so she realizes that there must be some pain there for Henry that she can maybe help him work out. We also, in that same episode, which will be 9, we have Abe's previous 2 times married wife. They've been married twice over a span of 30 years for like a total of 4 months. And that character is played by Jane Seymour. We're shooting that this week. Yeah, it should be super fun.
Last question. Sorry.
I don't think so.
We'll do 2.
Okay. So as a recovering Chuck addict,
yes,
you have a little bit of a reunion going on, it looks like, with Clemmer and Fedak. What's that been like working with them again?
That's great. Well, they're good friends. Phil actually, Clemmer just left yesterday. He was out here. So I recruited a bunch of the Chuck guys. So it's Chris Fedak, Phil Clemmer, and another writer named Zeb Barrow that all worked on Chuck. And then 2 of our editors, from the 2 of the editors, Matt Barber and Kevin Mott, are the editors of the show. So we're putting the band back together a little bit.
Great.
Yeah, there's a certain tone of that show, and this isn't as comedic, and it doesn't have like sort of the buy more stuff. But we've got a little bit with Lucas in the Emmys office, and yeah, it's just sort of a fun voice that we all kind of get to play with. It's
Awesome.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.